Last year, I had the pleasure of sitting here and introducing Wendy Silverstein, who told her story as at the time, the first female head of a New York City REIT. And now, of course, she's at WeWork, so I'd love to have her come back someday and add on to her story. But today, I get the opportunity to introduce Shynn. And for those of you who don't know, in China, you always pronounce the first name last, so I will be referring to her as Shynn. I met Shynn through our colleagues in China in 2009 when she came to New York to purchase a major investment trophy and walked up and down Park Avenue. The internet was ripe with articles that shared hints about her extraordinary past and her remarkable story and how she and her husband founded Soho China. And together, over 25 years, they developed it into the largest prime office developer in Beijing and Shanghai, with over 60 million square feet, which would make her larger than any New York City REIT. You can watch one-star female newscaster after another interview her, so I am way out over my skis. But she's now here full-time in New York, and she's building a new investment and development company. It's called Seven Valleys. And of course, in its short history, she's already made a very significant splash with an iconic investment on the Upper West Side that I'm sure she will tell us about. So we're going to start with a little video that gives you a sense of her company, Soho China. All right, I was humble before. I'm way more humble now. And that's
Thank you.
That's also a beautiful tie-in because actually I just mentioned that Wendy is now in the co-working space, and I think Shynn may have invented it in China. So, Shynn, you grew up in a very humble background during a really special time in Chinese history. Can you explain to us the conditions of education and professional development in your younger years in China? And was there any inspiration to become a real estate developer?
No. So I was born in China during the Cultural Revolution. Those are the days when China was, had not opened the market yet. There was no commercialism. So I grew up with, no colors that I remember, only just the gray walls for the houses, and everybody was dressed in gray Mao suit and just no color. And the sky was gray, and so there's just, the memory of my childhood was always gray. And so there was no aspiration to, I never even heard about the word real estate until much later, and definitely not growing up in China. But what you have seen in China, it was really the last 30 years of all the urbanization and the reforms. You go into cities in China today, you would not recognize. If someone had only been there 30 years ago and now come back, would not recognize.
Right. So you started as a factory girl in China, in Hong Kong, for 5 years, and then you made your way to England. So why'd you take the leap of faith to go there, and what did it do for you, and where did that decision take you?
So I, like most Chinese, the day that the door opened from China, that's late 70s, if you can get out of China, you will leave. So I went to Hong Kong. And then I was not even 15. So then in Hong Kong, I couldn't really speak the dialect, this Cantonese, and didn't know anybody, and I went with my mother. So the only place I could really, find a job is in factory. And those days when Hong Kong was still a center for manufacturing in a small scale, not today's China scale, in a small scale. So I ended up working as a factory girl for 5 years. And then, of course, I was desperate to get out. Every day I was thinking about how do I get out of this factory environment. Those days, factories were, work was very repetitive. These jobs should really be replaced by robots, not done by humans anymore. But I remember just putting little chips on the board every day, just 8 hours putting chips on the board, and then put the board on the conveyor belt and then goes to the next person. And it puts another 3 chip on the board and then puts on the conveyor belt and goes to another person. So every day just doing it. Hours really long, like it just doesn't seem to move. So I was desperate to get out. And so 5 years later, I saved enough money to get myself a plane ticket here. And I went to England. So that's how I got out of my 5 years as a factory girl.
Right. I remember you telling the story, though, when you got to England.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It was
Let's
so,
go there.
I got to England. I told the story in 60 Minutes. If any of you have seen that, probably heard about this. So I'll repeat it again. I got to England, I started crying. So because this is the first time I was away from a Chinese community, right? And then I arrived this place, nobody spoke Chinese, and I couldn't speak a word of English. And then I couldn't even see any Chinese. I was like, oh my God, where have I, where is this place? So I really got scared. I always thought myself are fearless, no scared. I was scared. And I sat on my suitcase, started crying and thinking, what do I do? And then I said, okay, I can't just sit here and cry. I need to get out. So I went out, went to supermarket. I needed to buy some food, asked people where's supermarket. I couldn't really express myself. And then I found one Chinese face on the street. So I stopped her, happens to be a Chinese. And so she took me to the supermarket and then introduced me to a few people. From that moment onwards, I was fine.
Right, the sense of community. That's great. So you went through your education there, and then through that you moved on to Goldman Sachs. You want to please talk to us a little bit about that?
Yesterday, I went to see an architect. In her studio was on 50 Broad Street. And, I had 1 second of deja vu. I said, oh my God, I remember this place. When Goldman was at 85 Broad, do you remember that?
Yeah.
So that's when I had my first job in New York City for a few months as an analyst training program. So that was a place I remember. But of course, downtown is very different now. So that was, so I finished my education in England and got myself a job at Goldman Sachs and came here to get training, went back to Hong Kong to work. It was a good training, I remember, but I knew that I wanted to get out to do my own thing, at some point, and it didn't last very long. I lasted about 4 years on Wall Street and then went to do my own thing.
Right, back, okay. So why don't you try and tell us a little bit about your early projects in Beijing and how that evolved to where we are?
So this was back in 95, when China had no real estate market, when there was no mortgage, no banks were lending mortgage, when there was no home ownership, there was literally nothing. So then, but what we learned is that Beijing already began its new planning for the city, where the government wants to move these factories who are producing pollution to the outskirts of the city and paved way for city commercial center to be built, what we call CBD, Central Business District. So we heard about that planning, but no one knew how this would get done, because where does the money come from? No one had the money. Who's going to buy it? Nobody knows how to buy a home back then, 95. So I remember when, the Chinese New Year in February 95, we spent the Chinese New Year 1 week writing letters to the mayor of Beijing, to the governor of a construction bank, and telling them how important it is. You need to have mortgage. Without mortgage, no one can sell, because who has the money to buy? And the whole week we were just writing letters and letters. Now, fast forward, of course, later, we launched our project in 97, the first project. That project, one project, the first year, accounted for 25% of the entire Beijing mortgage market. So that's how small the market was.
Right, but it was effectively the Hudson Yards of the market,
it was, right? But it was small project. I mean, it was it would be 6 million square feet, that project.
I love that, small project.
China, everything is gigantic, right? So this project was account for 25% of the entire cities. The city is like a 25 million people city. One project was 25% of the mortgage market. But that's how we started. We really started with Beijing, becoming, about to be urbanized. We're really there in the right time, in the right place. We were just, our first project was actually a residential, because that's when people wanted to buy a home. And then people were like, I remember when we first put the model room out, model apartment out, I had no idea how this is going to work out, right? So I was imagining everything, like what do we need to put the music in? People need flowers in and furnitures in, and maybe this color's not right. And checking. There was no professional service, right? No one's going to give you what style, what design. No, not even designers, right? Really, because designers were like all work for government. They've only built government buildings.
So it was all gray.
It's all gray, exactly. So it needed to introduce some colors. In fact, I met a lady here. She worked for South China Morning Post. What's the lady's? Yes. I remember South China Morning Post wrote an article on us and said that these are the people, the lady who bring the colors to Beijing. That was the first project.
And that was probably some inspiration from your Hong Kong days with all those signs
exactly,
and everything, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So your work with the architect Zaha Hadid is a wonderful example of how women can work and help women. So one, if you tell us a little bit about your relationship there, and why did you in particular feel that you needed to bring important international architects to China?
So I started working not knowing architecture. I really love architecture because the more I work with the architects, the more I realize how interesting it is. And I realized that every building we build, yes, we're building apartment buildings, yes, we're building office buildings, but actually they all form the modern face of our city. Because today, if you go to different cities, if you go to Paris, what do you see? You go to see Eiffel Tower, right? You go to Beijing, what do you see? You go to see the Great Wall, right? Those were at the time built for different purposes. But then because of its architectural value, it became the culture, heritage. So I was always very aware of buildings carries that culture element more than the apartment we need, the office that we need. And with that understanding, I started just going to meet all the architects in the world. I still do this today. Like I just go to meet architects, visit their studios. Scott knows the first thing I do in New York City is to go to meet architects, because I always feel like without creativity, without a sense of a building, what are you going to build? You're going to talk about all the numbers, but in the end, you're not going to create anything amazing. So, of course, of all the people I met, no one comes close to what Zaha Hadid was like. She was not only the best women architect, the best architect in the world of her generation. So imaginative, so not anything that she has, everything she's shown me, I've never seen it before. And I was just so impressed by the pure imagination. Most people, creativity is kind of, you go step by step, right? So there was modernism, there's Mies van der Rohe. So then you do a bit more, you push it a bit more. This is completely different. This is something that Zaha's design language really came from her art, her love for Russian deconstructive art. And from that moment onward, if you ever seen her design for the Peak in Hong Kong, the very first project that she did, it's just not something you've seen. Anyway, I was very impressed, so I invited her to come to a competition that I always host a competition in every project that I do. She came and she won the competition, and we started working. She had a small office. She had an office of, 50 people at the time, and she hadn't really built that much. She was incredibly imaginative, and I took the risk of working with her. Sure enough, I knew what was the risk. A few months later, she said, I'm going to send you these two people. They can be there for a few months. And they came to Beijing, worked for a few months. And then she called me up and said, this person needs to come back to London. He can't be in Beijing anymore. I said, well, I cannot wait for you for a few months. Right? We have like hundreds of people going to be on the site, right? You can't take this guy And then she said, no, he needs to come back. He needs to come back. So we got into this, huge fight in Venice. I remember because we both were in Venice attending Venice Biennale. I was like, this person can't leave. He has to stay with my project. And I took the risk of hiring you. You haven't done anything. And she said, this person has to come back. He's not going to work for you for too long. It's 3 months is enough. And I was, okay, all right. That means we can't work on this. So I fired her on the spot. And I said, what am I going to do right now? I don't have an architect. She doesn't have a job. And so I very quickly found myself other architects, move on to do the work. So that was my first time collaborating with her. Years later, I thought it's a shame that we have not worked together. She is such imaginative, such creative talent. It'll be such a shame that with all these amazing urbanization happening in China, there's no Zaha Hadid building. So I called her up in London. I said, well, we should meet. And she said, you should come to see me. My office has grown. It's become a lot bigger. So I went and started working. And from that moment onward, we just had been nonstop. She did 4 of my biggest projects, 50 million square feet altogether. Wow. Until, the sad story, she passed away 3 years ago. And so we still have one development going on by her, designed by her, that's going to be turnkey completed next year.
That's great. Well, for those that don't know, Zaha was actually quite famous for she would always win the design competitions, but nobody would actually select her to go ahead and build them because they were so innovative and difficult to do. So, your faith in her really made a difference in her career too. So now let's you've chosen to move to the United States. And here in New York City, for those that don't know, given her ownership in the GM building and a number of other major trophies, that she's actually one of the largest female owners here, if not the largest female owner here already, by dollar volume of investment. But what opportunities do you now see here that brings you here full time?
Well, my aspiration just continued to build. I came to New York City. I started by just buying properties, and those were great. During financial crisis, that was the right thing to do. But I never want to just do real estate, only buy and sell. I always want to create things. And so I look around, New York is a very different place today than 10 years ago. When I first came, 2008, there was hardly any new buildings. There was no crane, and I was always wondering, why is New York so exciting, so energetic? There's no new buildings. People don't like new buildings. Very strange. People like art. There's a lot of artists, and they don't want to, build new buildings. They say, no, New Yorkers are conservative. They don't like new buildings. I think I was right. I thought, people are people. Why wouldn't people want new buildings? 10 years later, Hudson Yards built, World Trade Center is built, largely built. People love new buildings. Right. And it's the same. New Yorkers are no different from people from everywhere else. All love new buildings. So I've been having fun just going to see construction sites, see new buildings, new developments, and some really exciting buildings coming up, and already built some. So we have just committed to do a major development, and that will be coming up soon.
Care to talk about it?
So Disney sold ABC Studio. We bought that. So that's going to be together, I think one is a 1.6 million square feet between Lincoln Center and Central Park West. And another one is West End Avenue, another 1.2 million. So together, that would be 2.8 million square feet.
I said she started quickly. I wasn't kidding. Well, let's go to the fact that in China, you can afford to build with extraordinary architecture due to the cost of building, both personnel and materials. Welcome to New York. How do you continue to develop those type of trophy assets? Because we want you to.
New York is even more complicated than China, because I thought China was complicated, because New York, you have not just the city councils, the governments that needs to approve you, but you also have community boards and that's so more complicated than China. China, we just needed to care about the market and the government approval. So I'm learning everything about this new way of doing developments. But I think in the end of the day, what matters most is still in the best location, build the best buildings that can be, hopefully be the new icon for the location. That's what I always aspire to do. And I think that we can get bogged down by all the little details, who should be talking to the city councils, who should be talking about, but in the end of the day, I think what matters is just remember, buildings are going to be there for more than 100 years. Right. And I always remind myself, just don't think what's the immediate issues that you need to deal with. Yes, we need to deal with that, but buildings are going to be lasting for a long time. We need to think about the long-term values.
Right. So you'll be running a design competition?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Okay. I'd like to turn for a minute to slightly more personal and talk to you about, you did this all while married to a man who was smart enough to propose in 4 days. 4.
It's
and have 2 sons. And we've talked about your son who was up here
right.
at school. And
so we need to meet your daughter.
Yeah. I hope she won't embarrass me. Is my daughter in the room? I don't know. She's supposed to be here. But
she ran away.
Whoopsie. Can you just talk about how you balance that all in your life, please?
Balance work and life. Well, I am a very hands-on mother. So I'm always there, whenever they need me, and they need me all the time. So I'm always there. And the thing is, I'm very strict with what hours I work, what I don't. I never work for dinners, almost never. Dinners are always for the children, and morning is always for myself. I need to run in the morning. So, aside from the morning run and the dinner with the family, the rest of the time I can work. So that's the way I am, and so as a result, I've always been very involved with my children. My younger son is a soccer player. I always tell him, you're 18 now. This might be your last season as a soccer player. From your 5 years old to now, I have not missed a single major game in your life.
Wow, that's excellent. That's really great. Oh my God. So I think what I'd like to do is also ask you to share a story. We had in common our first deal together. Was her
Darcy brought me the first deal.
Right. So it was her purchase of 20% of the GM building. And it really did require her to win over 2 true giants of commerce, one being Mort Zuckerman, the founder of Boston Properties, and the second being Edmund Safra of the famous banking family. And I had the opportunity to host a lunch with her and Mort. But
that was memorable.
That was very memorable for me. I actually sat back and did nothing after I got them going. But why don't you talk about your investment in that and how that worked?
Well, I came in to this town in 2008 not knowing anything. I just knew one thing is financial crisis. New York is not going to go away. This must be the best time to buy. And so I came in and I was, again, not knowing anything about the market. I knew one thing is, in terms of risk, it's better to buy a building that's fully leased than an empty building. And it's better to buy an empty building than a piece of land. And always in the best location. So with that being the principle that we look at all the deals that Darcy presented to us and the GM building came along, I thought, wow, this is great. And let's talk to them. And then Goldman was selling, I remember, and we went to talk to them. And Mort was not easy at the time.
He really had control.
He had control.
Had full right of who he could choose to be the partner.
So I asked Darcy, can you set up a lunch? We just go to charm him or what? This guy is not giving me the control that I deserve, and let's go to talk to him. So Darcy set up the meeting. We met with him. He turned out to be actually totally fine. From that moment onward, everything worked.
Yeah, we were sitting at a table at the Four Seasons restaurant. I'd put the two of them across from each other, and I was next to Mort. And I just kept pinging, looking for some common ground. And so I brought up Harvard, and I literally said not another word for the rest of the lunch. So I came back to the office, like, how'd it go? I was like, perfect.
We got close. That was great. And it just still turned out, even today, we look back, this is one of the best investments I've made in New York City.
Oh, good. I'm so happy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what other areas are you looking to in New York? And I'm not exactly sure on the time because the time turned on way after we started. So, okay.
We're looking at everything, and obviously this is a time. There's, one thing is, New York in the last 10 years with such amazing development opportunities. Almost every category you look at is oversupplied, whether it's condo, office, multifamily, you name it, it's everywhere. But so the question is, how can we still find something that we want to work on and can still add value? It's not so easy. I mean, in the end of the day, I still believe in the best location, in the best building. So that's why, when Disney decided to sell ABC, when I heard about that location, I just called everyone. I said, I want to be in this deal because my first apartment was in 15 CPW. Sure. Right. So I knew that location. I thought, this is the best location, and I want to be in that deal. So that's how. Still, best location. Of course, even locations changing, right? We used to think Park Avenue is the best location. Now it's moving west. Right. And so all that is interesting. I think I personally think that the next couple of years they will have a lot of good opportunities.
Agreed. And so since we do have a little bit more time, how do you balance, though, your portfolio back home?
Well, I haven't been going home so much because the good thing about running a company together with my husband is that the year before I made 11 trips to China. And this year he made probably 10 trips to New York. So we kind of like rotate that way. And because New York office is new, we haven't really got the full infrastructure, the team yet. So it does require me to be here, more time. Once it's up and running and so on, then I'll be doing back and forth, running both Beijing, Shanghai, and here. Okay,
all right. You did say that you were going around and meeting the architects. Mm-hmm. I had set up for you to go see a building that I'd been involved in.
I like that.
Yeah, and what I do find fascinating is, and I don't think a lot of people in this room do this, is really get out and kick the bricks.
Yes.
I say that to my team every time an opportunity comes up. I'm like, they hate when I say, did you go look at it? And they go, oh. But so you've really been out looking at all the various buildings.
Yeah, there's nothing I enjoy more than just going on construction site or seeing buildings and feeling the buildings and knowing the market. And you don't know until you get there. I can read everything, but why not just get there? And when I get there, I was like this building you introduced me to. I was like, wow, you're so close to Hudson Yards. Why are the technology guys coming to you and not go to that building? It's like 1 block away. They're brand new, they look beautiful, and why do they want your old building? And he said, technology guys just want old buildings. They don't want new buildings.
It's really true. I had a Fireside Chat with David Arena, who runs JP Morgan, and Paul Dara, who runs East Coast Google. And we had that conversation, and it was fascinating how, Google just wants the bricks and the sticks and the beams, and it's just something that's in their nature. So
actually, this project I went to see, right? So the old part, because it's got 2 parts. One is the old part they redevelop, and on the top they add.
It's an old Verizon warehouse at 34th and 9th.
So I went in, I said, oh my God, these columns are so big, right? And I said, and because they need to reinforce the structure, they added even fatter, the columns, right? I said, the tenants don't complain about these columns. He told me the tenants love these columns. because they look old, like a printers. I was shocked. I said, people love columns? I never heard about that. In my life, we've been trying to make the columns disappear, right? This is like, not only they like the columns, they like these fat columns.
It's very funny because I had tried to get you to come down and look at Hudson Square, which is where Nor just did the big investment in the whole Trinity portfolio, all these printing warehouses. And when you heard that Disney went there, she was like, all right, now I'm going to look at it again.
And I look at your site, the one that you're doing now.
But it is interesting how they do like the older. So do you think we can pull off more Hudson Yards? I mean, when you really look at that, just the transformation of the impact on the city and the neighborhood and the community, that's what New York needs.
I felt very impressed by Hudson Yards. I mean, I did not think that would be, put it this way, Darcy, I was offered to buy an interest in Hudson Yards at the time, 2008. I thought this is a crazy idea. Remember, my idea was like buy a fully leased building better than empty building better than a piece of land. This was a piece of land. Instead, I bought a building that was fully leased. And guess what happened 10 years later? My tenants in the fully leased building are moving to the piece of land that got built the new buildings, and our buildings are become empty. So this is how risk.
Not GM.
Not GM. You know, this is market.
So all right. So really, I really appreciate this. It was very hard for me to figure out who I was going to be able to, complement Wendy's talk with. This has been perfect. I knew you'd be awesome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.